Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. On behalf of the Nursi Chair in Islamic Studies at John Carroll University, I would like to welcome you to our 14th annual Iftar dinner. We counted and it's 14 this year. We are very proud of it. The primary goals of the Nursi Chair are to foster a better understanding of Islam and Islamic theological traditions among the students of John Carroll University and other members of the John Carroll community, residents of the greater Cleveland area, and various national and international audiences. Again, one of the goals of the Nursi Chair is to promote interfaith dialogue amongst the members of the local, national, and international religious communities. Our Iftar dinner, this Iftar dinner and all our Iftar dinners are an integral part of that mission. I know by diversity of you all here tonight that we are well on the way. I have known Imam Abdullah for a long time, for quite a while now. He's a wonderful speaker, and I'm sure you will find his talk tonight enlightening. With that, I would like to turn the floor over to Dr. Sheila McGinn, the chair of our department, the Department of Theology and Religious Studies, to introduce our speaker tonight. Dr. McGinn, please.
Thank you, Dr. Saratoper. The cheap seats are in the front, so if any of you want to move up. I'm delighted to add the welcome of the department and the whole university to all of you who have come for, yes, isn't that amazing? 14 years, great. So I'm really delighted to introduce Imam Abdullah Antepli, who currently serves as the Chief Representative of Muslim Affairs at Duke University. Imam Antepli completed his basic training and education in his native Turkey. From 1996 to 2003, he worked on a variety of faith-based humanitarian and relief projects in Myanmar, or Burma, depending on your political leanings, and Malaysia, with the Association of Social and Economic Solidarity with the Pacific Countries. He's the founder and executive board member of the Association of College Muslim Chaplains, ACMC, and a board member of the Association for College and University Religious Affairs, which is spelled Acura. From 2003 to 2005, he served as the first Muslim chaplain at Wesleyan University. He then moved to Hartford Seminary in Connecticut, where he was the associate director of the Islamic Chaplaincy Program and Interfaith Relations, as well as an adjunct faculty member. He came to Duke in 2008 and served as Duke's first Muslim chaplain. You notice the theme there about the first everything, you know? First Muslim chaplain.
Always with the Methodists.
Yeah, that's good. You need people who are willing to break new ground, right? Trailblazers here. First, he was Duke's first Muslim chaplain from 2008 to 2014, and in his current work at Duke, Imam Antepli engages students, faculty, and staff across and beyond the campus through seminars, panels, and other avenues to provide Muslim voice and perspective to the discussions of faith, spirituality, social justice, and more. Imam Antepli also serves as a faculty member in the Duke Divinity School, teaching a variety of courses on Islam and the Muslim cultures. And so please join me in welcoming Imam Antepli.
Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. It is absolutely a distinct pleasure and honor to be back to Cleveland, to John Carroll University. My daughter was born here in 2001. So Cleveland has a very soft spot in our hearts, my princess, the light and love of my heart, who was born here. My remarks, which I'm hoping will be brief and thought-provoking, so we'll have a very rich conversation, will be primarily addressing to the non-Muslim brothers and sisters in the crowd. because for those who are Muslim, they've been fasting for 16 hours a day. 16 hours. And who can blame them if they won't remember anything and everything I said? And Ramadan is partially designed to put most people who call it a fasting, like our Jewish brothers and sisters fast once a year. And after finding out that you do this for about a month, they will have a hard time complaining about it. But especially those Christians who give up Diet Coke or chocolate during the month of Lent, the season of Lent, or those Catholic brothers and sisters giving up meat on Fridays and calling it a fast, I think that Islam or the Muslims took this practice, spiritual discipline, to a whole different level. And thank you for joining us in this month of Ramadan. The holiest of holy times for the Muslim community, where we take on multiple spiritual disciplines, try more forcefully and intentionally to feel the presence of God in our lives. The month of Ramadan is when we are again and again invited by the Almighty to revisit what's been revealed to us, what has been given to us as a source of guidance and wisdom, but bring also 11 months since the last Ramadan, since the past last Ramadan, to bring the kind of changes happen in our lives, bringing the lenses, the kind of human experience that we have developed over time. Because religion and tradition is a combination of two things: the divinely revealed word, revelation, and human experience. And the interaction and conversation and the communication between these two realities is what we call tradition, what we call religion. So every 11 months, with the kind of human experience that we grow, we develop, we change, we look to our tradition, our revelation, more specifically in the context of Islam, Quran, with a new set of eyes. What kind of wisdom, what kind of fingerprints of God in our lives, in our time? What kind of moral, ethical callings and requirements and commandments in the 21st century for Muslims living in the United States is expecting of us? But the Muslim community, understanding Islam as a religion and the Muslims as people, it is not a unique, it is not only a challenge, a responsibility, or a homework for the Muslims themselves. I don't have to convince anybody hard in 2017 that 9/11 and the post-9/11 realities, neither the American Muslim community, which is about 5-6 million of us living in the United States, I don't know what's the number for the Cleveland area. How many Muslims live in this part of the?
Roughly about 300,000.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, Muslims are everywhere, as some people trying to scare you. Neither the American society at large, nor the Muslim community in the United States, we were not ready. We were not ready to the multiple challenges, multiple struggles that this will bring to us. And in many ways, still, after 16 years of this heinous, treacherous act, still most of the society is struggling to understand Islam as a religion and Muslims as American citizens, and trying to integrate and accept them to the social fabric of American society. And in our struggles, we even, in some parts of the country, in some communities, we are forget about progressing but regressing. I'll just give you a few statistics. In 2002, 4 months after 9/11, when Americans were asked whether they have any negative views of Islam and Muslims, when Americans are asked, do you accept Islam as a kosher, acceptable, as American, as apple pie religion, American religion, and American Muslims as equal American citizens, about 21% of Americans said no to that question. They said, I don't accept Islam as an acceptable religion. Today, guess, what percentage of Americans says no to that question? What percentage of Americans have deeply rooted fear, anxiety, and negative views against Islam and Muslims? 57%. So in many ways, we are regressing. And the kind of political jargon, the kind of rhetoric in the presidential election, and the kind of administration that we have, and the kind of policies that's been implemented without being partisan or political in that sense, is showing that this task of understanding Islam as religion and Muslims as people is going to be the homework, is going to be the social, ethical, moral dilemma and challenge of the American society for many, many years to come. The American Muslim community, about 5-6 million of us, as I said, allow me to be the boring Duke University professor for about 10-15 minutes. Because before I talk about the kind of internal and external challenges that American Muslim community faces today, I want to talk about who we are. What consists of American Muslim community? And what are some of the basic demographics and facts that define the American Muslim community? And we have, especially in this holy month of Ramadan, so many external and internal challenges. In many ways, American Muslim community feels we are between many different rocks and hard places. Like we just start our holy month of Ramadan with the news of multiple tragic events from England to Egypt to Afghanistan to other places. And then there are reports of increasing anti-Muslim bigotry, increasing anti-Muslim hate crimes against Islam and Muslims. I was supposed to come to North Carolina, to Cleveland yesterday, but I came only this morning, partially because there were several mosques attacked and vandalized in North Carolina. How many of you have heard of this? How many of you? It doesn't even make the mainstream. Just 2 years ago, less than 3 miles from my house, there are 3 Muslims in Chapel Hill, 3 UNC Muslim students who have been killed in an execution style. But somehow none of these acts of hate crime and violence against the Muslim institution is not making the mainstream American news. But before we get into these troubling, and my ending will be a hopeful message. And I think in many ways, this is going to be an incredible opportunity for American society by struggling or through struggling to understand Islam and Muslims, by resisting the message of hate, by resisting the message of exclusion. Inshallah, God willing, America will be a better society, a better country. We will be emerging out of this crisis as we have emerged in many, many crises before. Our relative success to similar struggles of understanding African American community, understanding Catholic community, understanding Jewish community, our relative success in defeating racism didn't go anywhere. But if you look where we are today, compared to where we were 60 years ago, vis-a-vis racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, sexism, we came a long way. Our relative success in those areas should give us hope. And we should never, none of the realities, the kind of painful realities that we are facing today, should push us into the destructive hands of hopelessness and despair. Who are American Muslim communities? The number goes from 2 million to 15 million people. And it depends on who's counting and who do you ask. But I think that Harvard University's Pluralism Project, Diana Ack, she provides the most accurate sort of number of 5 to 6 million people living in the United States as Muslims. Islam and Muslims have 4 major waves of encounter to Americas. And for those who know these basic facts, I hope this is not going to be too redundant and boring. There has been 4 major waves of Muslim immigration to the United States and North America. The first major Muslim immigration took place when America was actually not even the United States of America. The first major Muslim wave of immigrants came to this part of the world were Africans who were brought to this country as slaves. And no one knows the exact number, how many of those people who were forcefully enslaved and brought to the United States, and in many of the ways this country was built on their back, on their sweat, on their hard work. Many of these people were Muslims. But the destructive legacy of the slavery didn't allow these people to keep their cultural and religious identity and introduce Islam to this part of the world for a very long. In 1 or 2 generations, unfortunately, these people were stripped from their every possible cultural, religious, historical connection to Africa and the West African Islam that they brought with them. In 1 or 2 generations, unfortunately, it completely. I shouldn't say completely, because it's very interesting. If you come to North Carolina, South Carolina, there are some African American churches who built their churches towards east. They don't know why. There are some African American communities in Savannah, Georgia, in South Carolina. They don't eat pork, but they don't know why. Clearly, something left, even in the most destructive environment of slavery. They were able to retain certain aspects of their religion and their religiosity. And about 5 to 6 million American Muslims living in the United States, 1/3 of us come from this African American Muslim community. But Islam in African American society has come sort of a resurrection in the mid-20th century. When the slavery was abolished and when the large number of African former slaves from South moved to the industrial North, including Cleveland, a movement called Nation of Islam was introduced to the African Americans as an alternative to Christianity, as an alternative to Protestantism. I'm not going to go into the detail, but that form of Islam in the context of black nationalism and African American empowerment has emerged with very little creed, with very little Quran, with very little Islamic law, but mostly self-empowerment, mostly symbolic alternative language where the black suffering and black religion can articulate its painful history. So many African Americans, under the leadership of Elijah Muhammad in 1940s and 50s, they found a voice within the world of Islam without necessarily knowing very little about Islam and Muslims first. They were basically shifting their articulation of their post-slavery human suffering in the language and the symbols of Islam with very little content. And millions of African Americans found incredible solace, comfort, and self-development and empowerment in connection to this Nation of Islam movement. But as that movement matured and as they interacted with the rest of the Muslim community, especially with the conversion of Malcolm X in 1965, many of these Nation of Islam Muslims who took this as a national racial identity to themselves also deeply connected to the Islamic theology, and overwhelming majority of these Nation of Islam Muslims, which is a form of black nationalism, became mainstream Sunni Muslims today. So about 5-6 million Muslims living in the United States, 1/3 of us are coming from African American reality. They are indigenous. Many of them and their great-grandparents came to country much earlier than many people think. They're as American as apple pie here. And they are as African American as anything gets, and they reflect the entire diversity, richness, and cultural embeddedness and rootedness of African American society. If you go to their mosques, if you go to their communities, it's very difficult to tell these people, go back to where you came from. It's very difficult to shout at them, go back to where you came from, because they have been here part and parcel. This is the first wave of historical immigration, African American Muslim community. The second wave, which again was not very successful in introducing Islam as a religion and Muslims as the people to American context, happened over the turn of the 19th century. When Ottoman Empire was fighting many battles, my ancestors were fighting in many parts of the Middle East, North Africa, and in Eastern Europe. They were aggressively drafting men to army. And many men who didn't want to join the Ottoman army, they heard there's a promised land, there's a new land in North America, and many of them migrated between 1890s to 1924 until this country started imposing racial quotas on their immigration. About 1 million Muslims, according to, from the Levant, from Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, from North Africa migrated to this part of the world. But unfortunately, in 1924, immigration rules became very strict and based on the race, and therefore there was no continuation of institutions, religious leaders, cultural leaders coming to this part of the world. And this generation of almost 1 million Muslims from Middle East and North Africa, more or less, unfortunately, assimilated or later joined much later waves of Muslim immigrants to this country. The third and the major, one of the most significant Muslim encounter to this part of the world happened in 1965. What happened in 1965? More importantly, when you think about mid-1960s, what do you think in the United States?
Johnson signed
Civil rights movement. But before Johnson signed the immigration movement, I think one of the major transformations took place in this country, that we as a nation change and move the furniture in our minds when we talk about race. America decided to talk about race differently as a result of the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement forced our nation to go to a deep soul search about the kind of nation that we would like to be. And since then, racism didn't die. African American community still goes through many different challenges, but we don't talk about race the way we talk in the Jim Crow era, in the segregated era anymore. It's a major achievement. So the kind of ideological mindset change happening in American society in one way, like the racially imposed immigration didn't make sense. Do you understand what is racially imposed immigration? Meaning, from 1924 to 1965, America was allowed to accept immigration or immigration in general based on what is the racial divide in America. What percentage of Americans are from white race? That percentage can come and immigrate. What percentage is black? What percentage is Middle Eastern, etc. Which allowed to keep most non-white immigration out of the United States. But after 1965, as a result of civil rights movement and also as a result of Cold War, our companies, our American companies, corporate world, the business world were pressuring American government, saying the cream of the crop of the world, these genius, they all go to Soviet Russia to do their PhDs. We are not able to get them because our immigration laws are based on particular ethnicity and race. Combination of civil rights movement's ethical, moral pressure and the corporate world's pragmatic and the capitalistic pressure. Lyndon Johnson, yes, abolished our immigration law, meaning from there on, we are welcoming anybody and everybody who is willing to come to this country and contribute to our society, which allowed millions of the brains, really cream of the crop of the third world, as graduate students to come to the United States, become engineers, doctors, and teachers. So about 2/3 of the Muslims today, 5 to 6 million Muslims living in the United States, which I am included, come from this post-1965 waves. And the story of this 2/3 of the American Muslim community in the United States is one of the most successful integration story of a minority ethnic community in the United States. Not only these post-1965 people who came to this country, like many people in the crowd, as broke graduate students. What year did you come, Dr. Hassan?
I came in here in 1970.
70. And many of them came as, mostly I think, as broke graduate students. But in 40 years, there has been an incredibly successful Muslim integration reality happening. That's the sad thing. When you hear 1 in every 2 Americans feel uncomfortable with Muslims. 1 in every 2 Americans feel they have negative views or discomfort vis-a-vis Islam and Muslims because our perception is such. And I don't blame these people. That's what I'm going to discuss next. But what's painful is our reality is very, very impressive. Muslim American women are the second most educated ethnic minority woman in the United States, just behind the Jewish American woman. Our average annual income, our education, our ability, like one of the indication that this post-1965 Muslim community, unlike Muslim immigration to Europe, is so successfully blended and in many cases socially, economically, not culturally yet, became, as American apply, is look at the number of Muslim students on college campuses. I have been a college Muslim chaplain for the last 15 years, and every 3 years we are doubling our numbers. Every 3 years. At Duke University, we have 700 Muslim students. When I started 10 years ago, it was about 150, 160 Muslim students. If you look on the top 50 universities of American campuses, there's an increasing number of Muslim presence. Why? Because this community, like it's one of the indication of wealth, education, and integration to American society, that the last piece of the puzzle of realizing American dream is to send your children to college. An increasing number of these graduate students who came in 1960s and 70s, they are able to send their children. And in 10 years, you will see the Muslim presence on college campuses, despite all the rising Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry will be equal, if not a little bit bigger than the Jewish community, meaning it'll be 10 to 15% of the top 50, top 100 colleges. We are doing really well in terms of our reality. But in terms of our perception, there is 10 miles, at least 10 miles between our reality and between our perception. This third wave of Muslim immigration to the United States, we still cannot talk about American Muslim identity as a fully formed cultural identity. But this third wave, the quality of the third wave, their ability to integrate so quickly, these people brought the kind of intellectual, economic and social competency that they are able to compete in the American intellectual market, that even though we can still not talk about American Islam the way we talk about Middle Eastern Islam, Turkish Islam, or Indonesian Islam, that cultural identity will emerge in a couple of generations. But through this third wave of immigration, Islam has been permanently introduced as a religion, because this community is in the business of building institutions, bringing religious leaders, producing cultural identity, cultural institutions, that Islam will be part and parcel of the United States for forever, inshallah, God willing. If you, just one last thing about this third wave, if you compare the European Muslim integration, if you compare the kind of European Muslims, their lack of integration or their ability to produce German Islam, French Islam, or British Islam, I will just give you an example. My daughter, who was born in Cleveland, about 3 months ago, he did a presentation about our second president, John Adams. She's fascinated by him. She thinks he's the best thing since sliced bread was invented. Because of him, she gives him a lot of credit because of our Anglo-Saxon system. We didn't become Francophone because of John Adams. Anyways, she just made a presentation about John Adams at her high school. You should see the kind of pride in her Americanness, the way she's claiming John Adams, the way she talks in her civic class. I recorded 6 minutes of that video and sent to my cousins in Germany and France. As a Turk, I have 36 cousins living in Germany who are third generation German Turkish Muslims. Third generation, meaning their parents were even born in Germany. They are successful doctors, they are successful engineers, teachers, nurses, professors. But if you tell them you're German, they will feel offended, because neither themselves feel like German, nor the society accepts them as German. And here is my daughter, whose father came to this country 15 years ago, speak with a thick Turkish accent. She is carrying herself as if we came here before the Native Americans. That's what at stake. That's what at stake with rising Islamophobia, rising hate. That's what we have the risk of losing this society. I think the difference is not in the Muslims. Why the European Muslims, after third generation, still not fully integrated? Why within a generation here in America, many Muslims, like my daughter, become proud, patriotic American citizens and accept their country, defend their country, and serve their country. They are upright citizens in this country. The difference is also in the context, because being an American, unlike being a German, being a British, being a French, is not tied to any particular race, any particular religion, and a particular community. And therefore, these regretful Islamophobes, these people who are trying to exceptionalize and reject and unwelcome Islam as a religion and Muslims as people in this community, is doing such a huge disservice, not to Muslims, but to America, but to this country. And therefore, we have to deal with rising anti-Muslim bigotry, not as a Muslim issue, not as a favor to the Muslim community, not as an act of charity to the Muslim community, but as an American issue. Because hate, when it starts and when it sort of takes root in any particular community, when an exclusion and unwelcome collectively dehumanize, assassinates a character of a religion, of a community, that destruction and cancer doesn't remain in that community only. That cancer spreads to all other communities. the famous German Lutheran theologian, in the context of Holocaust during Second World War. Remember, he says, first they came for Jews, I wasn't Jew, so I didn't care. They came for the communists, I wasn't communist, I didn't care. I wasn't homosexual, I didn't care. I wasn't gypsy, I didn't care. By the time they came to me, it was too late. There was no one left. We are not in that kind of drastic situation. But that's absolutely the case, that we have to understand the rising Islamophobia, the title of my lecture, the rising anxiety, social anxiety against Islam and Muslims. In many ways, I'll try to say this a little bit differently. And I know we are going to have a Q&A session where we will be engaging any and every question about Islam and Muslims. Islamophobia is not rising anti-Muslim bigotry is not a unique challenge, and somehow if Muslims in America put their acts together or condemn the violence happening in the name of Islam, somehow if we put our acts together, this problem will not disappear. The rising current anti-Muslim bigotry is nothing but a manifestation of old habits, old wounds that we thought we have recovered, we have healed ourselves from many, many decades ago. In many ways, anti-Muslim bigotry today, the kind of social anxiety which makes 1 in every 2 Americans feel uncomfortable with Islam and Muslims, which exceptionalize, and the funny thing about this 57%, that's when you see the kind of the depth and destruction and the scale of the hate doing to these fellow Americans. This 57% of Americans who feel uncomfortable with Islam or negative views of Islam and Muslims, when you ask them, do you believe in religious freedom? 92% says yes. Do you believe people should be practicing their religion the way they like it? They say yes. We are in the United States, it's a sacred value for us that everybody should be able to practice their religion as they like. But when you ask them, do you feel comfortable having a mosque in your neighborhood? They say no. Do you feel comfortable sitting next to a visibly Muslim on a plane? Or having a Muslim neighbor? That means these people are not racist or hateful, unethical people. They have ethical moral standards. They have kind of the commitment to civil liberties and the kind of religious freedom. But they exceptionalize it for one community. They somehow lower their standards, their level of commitment to the civil liberties when it comes to Islam and Muslims. And therefore, this is not about Islam and Muslims. Meaning, if you exceptionalize one community, if you lower your standards to one community, unfortunately that disease spread to all at the end. And this rising anti-Muslim bigotry could potentially destroy and rip the social fabric of American society, which is based on inclusion, diversity, not the basic promise of the United States. We will be judging people based on what you do, not based on who you are. That's the promise of the Statue of Liberty. We will be judging you based on what you do. Your actions will be the kind of measure for judgment, not your ethnic, religious, racial identity or gender, etc. The Muslim community today is between many different fires, as I said. Between many different fires. One, external realities. External fires that the kind of increasing Islamic, increasing extremism or religious fundamentalism happening in certain parts of the Muslim majority world, which is defining this 5 to 6 million Muslims reality in the United States. Most of our breakfast conversations for American Muslims, we wake up in the morning, our decision to send our children to school is depending on what happened 6 hours, 7 hours ahead of the game. Whether something happened in different parts of the world, often in the name of Islam, some of the terrorist organizations committing heinous crimes, barbaric crimes in the name of our religion, using our religious language, our religious symbols, is affecting the kind of reality. That's why the innocent Islamophobia should be understood. We as Muslims, we shouldn't dismiss this 57% of the American Muslims who feel uncomfortable, somewhat fearful of Islam and Muslims, because most of it is innocent. If we were a regular Joe, know nothing about Islam and Muslims, have never met a Muslim, and since 9/11, everything we hear about this religion is killing, beheading, war, death and destruction, hijacking planes. inevitably you will develop those negative views of Islam and Muslims. So, and that level of innocent Islamophobia or anti-Muslim bigotry could be treated through education, interaction, engagement, and dialogue. For our lecture's purpose, understanding Islam and Muslims cannot divorce itself, cannot disconnect itself from the responsibility of what is that ugly external reality? What is this Islamic extremism? Who is ISIS? Who is Al-Qaeda? Who is Osama bin Laden? Who is this jihadism? What is this barbaric images or realities happening in the name of Islam? And there are two very unhelpful voices vis-a-vis this reality. In terms of, the terms are important, and I think we should be able to use it very, very intentionally. The evil business of terror, killing, death, and destruction in the name of Islam, your ability for average American to understand Islam as a religion and accept Muslims as equal American citizens depend on what is this in the 21st century, the kind of barbarism and the bloodshed happening in the name of religion. And there are two unhelpful answers. One is often naive Muslims, and they look at ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, or Al-Shabaab in Somalia. A naive and very unhelpful answer is, this has nothing to do with Islam and Muslims. Almost like a childish denial. This has nothing to do about us. This is an abomination. These people are, and I even heard people saying these people are not Muslims. I don't think this is helping. Because as much as I hate Osama bin Laden or Al-Qaeda, as much as I'm disgusted by ISIS, as much as they turn my stomach upside down, I cannot say that they are not Muslims. They are. As Crusaders were Christians, as KKK is Christians. Like you can't, denying or putting your head in the sand is not going to solve the problem. The second unhelpful answer to this question of what is this monster boogeyman that has been created is mostly by the haters of Islam or ill-informed people of Islam. They look at this ISIS and Al-Qaeda saying this is exactly the most authentic, most accurate manifestation and interpretation of Islam. This is Islam. If you look on CNN, I have been to CNN 91 times. I spoke on CNN as a mainstream Muslim American leader. The longest one was 3 minutes. In total, in those 90 plus interviews, I spoke about 37 minutes. I get that much coverage. If you look in the way in which media or the kind of loud voices covering Islam and Muslims, that's why we have this problem. That's why we moved from 21% of Americans confused about Islam and Muslims into 57%, because most of the coverage, there is a voice in American society is, if you take this religion seriously, if you take really the core of this religion, the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad, and if you really live up to its ideals, you will find ISIS, you will find Al-Qaeda, you will find terrorist organizations. Both are extremely wrong. Both answers are extremely wrong and unhelpful, and it's confusing fellow Americans to say that these people have nothing to do with us. We have nothing to do with them. But every day people see these people. They are visibly Muslim, quoting Quran, doing horrible stuff. But if you treat 1.6 billion people, 1,400 years of a religion, and confine and reduce and shrink it to the worst of its, like try to explain Christianity through Crusaders or KKK theology, it's going to make a huge disservice. So the answer should be, there are 4 Islams. There are 4 categories of every religious communities that these people, evil people, as minority as they are, doing evil things in the name of Islam, are a product of the slice of all 4 categories. The first one, so your ability, you came here with a lecture, Understanding Islam and Muslims. There are 4 Islams, and in basic minimum understanding should be distinguishing these 4 major categories between one of them. The first category is the Islam as religion. Islam as theology, Islam as belief system, Islam as in its abstract, theoretical, theological form. It's like Christianity. The second Islam is how this religion and belief system of Islam manifests itself in the human experience. When it becomes and when it gets into a human experience. The second Islam is Islam as Muslims. It's like Christianity, Christians, Judaism, Jews. The third Islam, which is very, very important, and you will never be able to understand the kind of mess going on in many parts of the Muslim majority world unless you understand this third Islam, is Islam as history. You will never understand the first Islam, Islam as the religion of today, and the second Islam, Islam as Muslims today. You will not be able to look at the 1.6 billion people and make sense of their current contemporary realities unless you study what kind of history or histories gave birth to the present day situation. What histories have shaped the reality of the current situation of the Muslim majority world. And in that history, it's not the history of the Muslim world. It's not only the history of the Muslim majority world. Because if you look at the last 200, at least 150 years of the Muslim majority world, their history is a global history. Their historical experiences is not only what happened between their borders, but what happened globally. And what was the impact of the global certain historical realities, including colonialism, including the multiple world wars, etc. One of the biggest difficulties, you will never be able to understand the roots of religious fundamentalism, extremism, killing in the name of religion in the Muslim world, unless you actually look at the destructive legacy of the colonial colonial legacy in the most of the Muslim majority world. Part of the problem in the West, if you are subject to oppression, occupation, and mistreatment, and if you are still living the legacy of that destruction, that's a very current reality for you. But if you are not part of this, if you haven't gone through that experience, it's such a far reality. For many Americans, it's so funny. When I came to this part of the country, when you talk about colonialism, they think it happened before Jesus. Colonialism, long time ago. Like, what happened? But for people who are living the destructive legacy of that colonialism, it's happening every single day. It's like as an imam, as a counselor, in your counseling of the depression, if a 60-year-old, 70-year-old man or woman come to you for help, struggling for what happened when they were 7 years old. Something happened, rape, molestation, physical or emotional abuse. The worst thing you can say to these people is just get over it. Just because they are still carrying the scars of the... So looking at the Muslim world, looking at the kind of devastation that European colonialism has caused in the Muslim world, and somehow in the West, divorcing ourselves from all the ethical, moral responsibilities and saying these people just move on. Why can't you produce democracies? Why can't you produce functional economies? Why can't you produce civic society and social institutions which will enable and sustain your democratic societies? You can't say that. You can't say that because those people are still, for them, the same thing about the Crusaders, for example. For many, many people living in the West, it happened before Adam and Eve. Even they were sent to the gardens. But for those who are living in that part of the world, that legacy is continuously, it's happening as we speak. Many of the conflicts in many parts of the Middle East, still for the experience of the Muslims, is the continuation of another waves of... Therefore, for those of us who are living in the West, trying to understand the Muslim world and the kind of mess happening in that part of the Muslim world, we cannot divorce ourselves as Western societies in terms of our own responsibility of the kind of problems that we are facing. I am not blaming West for Islamic extremism or Muslim terrorism, but it would be dishonest to say the least. Some of our foreign policies, economic policies, some of our involvements in that part of the world by supporting their dictators, putting their bloody tyrants in our payroll and enabling them to torture their own people for a very long time, or being an uneven-handed mediator to many conflicts in the Middle East, and causing pain and destruction here, is part of the problem. And we should be able to understand at least the kind of, we should understand enough to feel that part of it is our responsibility. For many of the failure is a global responsibility. One of my teachers is Abraham Joshua Heschel, the famous rabbi. In the context of civil rights movement, he basically said this famous word, saying there are few people who are guilty, few people who are racist, few people who are haters, but it says all of us are responsible. All of us are responsible. That external ugly reality under many different names, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc., is a result of Islamic theology alone, Muslim theology or Quran alone. These people are not sitting in the caves reading Quran and somehow misunderstanding and becoming violent. That's not the case. I wish it could be that simple. If it was that simple, we would just basically replace their education with a better education and the problem would be solved. These people are, as a result of wrong ideology and religion, but also deeply, deeply broken societies, socially, economically, historically, culturally, deeply broken societies, which we also in the West, including the United States, has played a partial role in the destruction of that reality. I'll just give you one very current example. ISIS, which is as evil as a religious fundamentalism can go. But to talk about ISIS as a reality, which we should condemn, and try to undermine and destroy them in their ideological roots. But at the same time, we cannot talk about ISIS as a reality without talking about American invasion of Iraq. You cannot, these are two very connected realities. We cannot divorce ourselves from the partial responsibility in the creation of this monster and talk about ISIS as if this is just a religious and theological problem of the Muslim community. And somehow, if Muslims condemn the violence that ISIS is committing in long enough, loud enough, until our faces turn blue, this problem will be solved. That's absolutely not the case. So the fourth Islam, Islam as religion, Islam as Muslims, Islam as history, and many different historical realities. And the fourth Islam is Islam as in the perception or misperception of its stereotypes. Unfortunately, Islam as evil, Muslims are terrorists. Islam as evil, Muslims are terrorists. This has been repeated enough number of times. This has been repeated enough number of times that a lot of your attempts as non-Muslim average American to understand Islam and Muslims, a lot of your ability to learn and educate will have to start with unlearning what you have already learned. You have to basically decode. If Islam is a completely unknown religion, it could have been much easier in understanding Islam and Muslims of 5 to 6 million American Muslim community. But unfortunately, a wrong misconception, the repetition. I don't know how many of you not know who Karl Rove is.
I've heard of him.
Very interesting gentleman, which I have very little respect for. But he says something to his team all the time. He says, what you are trying to convince people, what you are trying to sell to people as an idea, it doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to be scientifically proven. It doesn't have to be logical. You just have to repeat enough number of times. If you repeat enough number of times, even the most enlightened, most educated, most open-minded, most Jesus-like will basically get the message. If they don't believe Islam is evil, Muslims are terrorists, they will at least come to a point where something is wrong with these people. Something is innately, inherently wrong with these people. Something is wrong in their theology, in their Quran, in their way of treating women. Something is somehow, it gives the impression that Muslims have monopoly over anything and everything bad. And this has been repeated enough number of times that, unfortunately, for many of our ability to learn Islam and Muslims in this kind of climate should be unlearning first. Uneducating ourselves first. Replacing the existing toxic, negative views and images of Islam with the kind of beautiful Muslim faces that you see in the crowd. I will end with this and open up the question, and I hope you will ask anything and everything about, I don't know how often you meet an imam and ask and shmooze questions I hope you will get this as an opportunity and ask anything and everything you have in your mind, because I have a lot of good help. There are so many incredible educated Muslims in the crowd. They can help me with the answers to that question. The worst thing about the last challenge that I mentioned, that the unlearning, that task is unfortunately also happening pastorally and emotionally for the American Muslim community as well. I see increasing number of Muslims, it's been repeated enough number of times the voices of exclusion, unwelcome, dehumanization repeated, that many Muslims started internalizing this message. I don't know which one is more painful, to be an imam at a prestigious university, at Duke. Our rejection rate is 98%. We only accept 2% of the tens of thousands of students are applying. Meaning, if you get in there, you should be proud. It's not that easy to get accepted to Duke University. But to see my students, 17, 18, 19-year-old students, they made it to Duke. Their parents came in 1970s as broke graduate students. They succeeded. But I see how much weight they are carrying on their hearts and minds as a result of this increasing repetition of you don't belong here. They don't feel the full pride and joy in themselves, not because of they have anything done. They didn't do anything wrong. They did everything right. But because of who they are. Because of how they look, because of how their names sound, how their multiple identities or parents' origins have been discussed in American society. That internalization is very deep, and this is what we need to fight within the Muslim community to make sure that propaganda should not get into our own underskin. I will never forget, during the first Gaza war in 2009, one of the rabbis, former chief rabbis in Israel, a horrible human being. He doesn't represent the entire Judaism or Israeli society. He's just a violent man and using religious language. Former chief Sephardic rabbi, Mordechai Eliyahu, who's being condemned by many, many other rabbis. But in the context of the first Gaza war, he declared a fatwa, a religious ruling. 3 pages of religious ruling. Basically, in his twisted and distorted understanding of Judaism, he is religiously arguing that there is no innocent civilians in Gaza, and therefore we should be able to use a carpet bomb and kill all of the Gazans. In a way, he is not saying as a war strategy. In a way, he's a Jewish Osama bin Laden. He's a Jewish Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. In a religious language, he is arguing that we should kill these people, all of them. Again, he's in no way representative of his community, his religious community. He's just crazy, violent person advocating religious violence. But that morning, 3 hijabi Muslim Duke University students holding the newspaper article of this particular rabbi, running to my office in laughter, in joy. They came to my office and saying, Imam Abdullah, we don't own all the crazies in the world. We don't own all the crazies in the world. They have their own crazies. We don't have monopoly in religious violence, etc. And I didn't know whether to laugh or weep, seeing that internalization that these 17, 18-year-old Muslims made to feel that as if we own all the crazies in the world. My friends, my brothers and sisters in faith and in humanity, despite all the troubling times, I hope I made somewhat the justice that the challenges, the fear and the anxiety against Islam and Muslims, it's not a unique problem. It's a civil rights problem of American society. And therefore, the way we have dealt with these civil rights issues in the past vis-a-vis our African American brothers and sisters, our Jewish brothers and sisters, our ability to empower women in our society, this problem will only get better. This 57% will heal itself and will go to the margins. Because if you look, after 8 years of eating bacon, drinking wine, and going to church, 29% of Americans still believe Obama is Muslim. Go figure. I don't know how many times this man needs to be baptized. But if you take this 29% to certain states, certain churches, certain political parties, that's like 60%, 70%. Meaning, but if you pay attention to the way they say Obama is Muslim, and that's a bad thing, they actually say Obama is black. But it's not kosher, it's not cool to say Obama is black in a pejorative sense, and therefore they are saying Obama is Muslim. So in a way, anti-Muslim bigotry and hate, and fighting against this hate, fighting against this anti-Muslim bigotry is not a Muslim responsibility. It's an American responsibility. It's a Christian responsibility. It's a Jewish, it's a humanistic responsibility. And we have to talk and diagnose and treat this issue as an American problem and find out American solutions to it. And the way we dealt with the previous problem, we have to, in the spirit and the methodology and ethical moral framework of civil rights movement, we should fight against this. I am absolutely confident, despite everything, even though I am keeping my phone on all the time, because I have a daughter and a wife with hijab in North Carolina, where the anti-hate crime. I have a lot of reasons to be angry, hopeless, and in despair. But I believe there is something deeply healthy in the heart of America. There is something deeply, deeply committed to make this country for country of all. That this is a temporary crisis, that if we can reactivate that spirit of civil rights again and fight against this cancer as Americans collectively, and not only assign all the responsibility and guilt to Muslims or crazies and everybody. If we collectively respond, inshallah, I know that we will bury the Islamophobes of today into the same garbage bin that anti-Semites of yesterday, racists of yesterday, and I know the voices of exclusion of today, voices of racism and unwelcome today will be thrown into the same garbage bin of 1960s, 40s, and early 1900s, inshallah. Thank you, and God bless every single one of you. Will we
have time maybe like for a few questions?
And I will accept one male, one female question, so we'll have the gender balance.
Okay.
Yes, sir. I'll take care of it, please.
Help me understand if there is a doctrinal difference between Sunni and
Shia.
Shia. And I've read the the relatives are different and all that, but I just got to believe that there's more of a
Thank you.
doctrinal difference between those two.
Thank you for voicing the comments. What's the difference between Sunni and Shia? Before you sit down, when did you first heard this word Sunni and Shia? When did you first?
10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Most Americans heard the word Sunni and Shia, please, in the context of American invasion of Iraq in 2003. Most Americans, they have never heard this before. And when we were invading the country, liberating them, finding weapons of mass destruction, remember all that lies? 700,000 civilians were killed since then. Who loses sleep in America today? Who faced any consequences? That's a side point. But I was watching CNN, listening our then Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, saying Sunni, Shia, and Kurds. We are about to invade Iraq, and he's talking about the country that he's about to invade, and he's talking Sunni, Shia, and Kurds. I thought Jon Stewart was making fun of him. I thought like he was joking, quite honestly. It took some time for me, because as someone who's from that part of the world, we never divide or define country in those terms. And saying Sunni, Shia, and Kurds is such a, what's the respectful way of saying idiotic, moronic way? I don't know how else to show respect to somebody who's been our Secretary of Defense. Saying Sunni, Shia, and Kurd is like saying Catholic, Protestants, and Italians. Because the Catholic and Protestant is a theological sectarian difference, but being an Italian is an ethnic or racial category. And if you think what's going on in the Middle East today between Sunnis and Shia is completely sectarian fight, before I explain what that is, again, about Islam, about anything related to Islam, first you have to unlearn what you learned, before I explain what Sunni and Shia is. If you think in Iraq or in the Middle East, especially in Iraq, Sunnis and if this fight and conflict is between Sunnis and Shias, all the Kurds are Sunnis. All the Kurds. Almost 99% of the Kurds in Iraq are Sunnis. You would think in the context of Iraq, the Sunni Kurds must be partnering and allying with the Sunni Arabs and fighting with the Shia Arabs, right? But that's not what's happening. The Sunni Kurds, with the help of our government, partnering with the Shia Arabs in Baghdad, and they are fighting against Sunni Arabs. So you are basically, in your confusion, your facial expression, you are expressing a lot of common sense that this can't be just about Sunni-Shia difference. This cannot be just because the kind of political or theological difference 1400 years ago, they are killing each other. That's absolutely not the case. Don't buy into this cheap media sensationalism and propaganda as if these people are just killing each other because of their sectarian differences. They are killing each other because of economic, social, political, tribal power, and with the kind of irresponsible and destructive foreign policies of the West, including the United States, destroying those social boundaries and institutions in those societies. To think that Sunnis and Shias for the last 1400 years, they have been killing each other and they've been in each other's throat is absolutely inaccurate. Absolutely historically not correct and not accurate. How many people do not know where Taj Mahal is? Or what Taj Mahal is? Do you know Taj Mahal? Incredible human civilization in India. An emperor loves his wife so much that after she died, he built this incredible monument. His wife was Shia, and emperor was Sunni. That was a Sunni Shia sushi love in the manifestation of love story. So it's not true. Like, we have to go beyond these skepticism. But honoring your question, what's the difference between Sunni and Shia? When Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, passed away, died, he did not leave a will, he did not leave a successor. And when the community was deciding who should be holding the office of religion, who should be holding religious leadership and political leadership, there were two major schools of thoughts. I'm a Sunni Imam, so I hope everything I will say will not make anybody feel that as if Sunnism is better than Shia. I hope I will make it justice in terms of explaining the both parties. A group of the community, I can't believe the phone is ringing. Somebody's calling for...
It is something.
Shall I answer?
No, I think.
Maybe Sunnis or Shias are calling.
They may be calling. Maybe they say it's time to go, maybe.
So a group of Muhammad's companions and his people, after he died, they felt very, very strongly that even though Muhammad was the final messenger and there will be no prophets coming after him, but people who have blood relationship and lineage connection to Prophet Muhammad, his descendants, his children and grandchildren, they should have a special category, and the religious leadership and the political leadership should be in the hands of people who have that connection to Prophet Muhammad and his family. That camp over time evolved through many different historical, political and social realities, that understanding, and they merged the camp of Shia camp. And the majority of that community and majority of the Muslims today, they felt that blood relationship, that lineage connection to Prophet Muhammad, in order to hold a religious leadership or political leadership, is not necessary. That the leadership should be based on qualification, whether you are qualified, whether you are pious, whether you are X, Y, and Z. That camp evolved through, again, not only religious, but historical and political waves, and they become the Sunni. About 85 to 90% of the Muslims are Sunni today, and about 10 to 15% of the Muslims are Shia. And Shias are majority in 4 countries: Iran, Iraq, Bahrain, and Azerbaijan. And it's a unique regional sort of reality. But we have significant populations of Shia community in Pakistan, in India, in Saudi Arabia, and some parts of Central Asia as well, in Tajikistan and in some other areas as well. So, but last thing I will say, the religious and sectarian differences play far less role than ethnic, cultural, political realities in the shape of society, country, politics, and government. Look at the 4 major Shia majority countries: Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Iraq, and Iran. Just because they are Shia, they are not the same. Bahrainis and Iraqis are Arab, they speak Arabic, they are Arab Shias. Azerbaijan are Turkic, they speak Azeri. And the Iranian Shias are Persian, they speak Persian. Their ethnic, racial, linguistic differences are far more important in their daily lives than their theological differences. Ladies. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for a great lecture. I work for the Anti-Defamation League, and we audit yearly incidents that we hear of anti-Semitism. So for last year, they were up 36% than the year before. And I'm wondering what's happening in your community. I know of whether there's been a spike, which for us started in the fall and continues up until today, in acts of anti-Semitism, whether it's the same for your community.
Thank you. Jonathan Greenblatt, the new CEO of ADL, is a very dear friend of mine, and we have developed this beautiful relationship. I was in Texas a couple of months ago, and Victoria, Texas, there was a mosque burning. The mosque burning started around 2:30 a.m. in the morning, and 4:30 a.m. in the morning, Jonathan was calling my cell phone number. Like, it's quite admirable that Anti-Defamation League, I have so many political disagreements and differences with the organization and its past leaders, but their ability to see the rise of anti-Muslim bigotry or hate crimes against Islam and Muslims, and pouring institutional support in reporting, archiving, and combating anti-Muslim bigotry is quite admirable, which I'm really grateful, and I would like to express that gratitude. Muslim community is right now where the Jewish community was 50, 60 years ago, in terms of their ability to build social institutions, organizations like ADL, AJC, JCRCs, JCPAs, Jewish Federation System. We are in the process of, that's why I'm saying we were not ready for 9/11. We were not ready. I mean, you guys were not ready 60 years ago when there was horrific anti-Semitism in this country. But Jewish community in many ways successfully transformed itself from a despised minority of 1920s into a somewhat comfortable and beloved minority of 2017. But there are several organizations. Brother Issam are here working to sort of catalog and register the anti-Muslim bigotry, but it's not in the professional and the kind of systemic way that it should be yet, unfortunately. That's the saddest part, that these harsh and disruptive post-9/11 realities didn't give us a time to build those mechanisms of defense and articulation, explanation. After 16 years of 9/11, many Americans are still asking, where are the moderate Muslims? And if you look at the Muslims, day and night, I travel 200 days a year, giving lectures, talks, workshops, etc. We are doing everything we can, and many people are like in the same situation. I go to, my son recently told a group of Jews, my father go to synagogues more than many Jews that we know. Like, my attendance in church and synagogues are much better than many Jews and Christians. But still, Americans are asking, where are the moderate Muslims? Partially because they don't go one extra mile and try to look to the voices of Muslims, what they are doing. And partially, we still have a long way to go in our ability to collectively discuss and be in charge of our own conversation and agenda. But we'll get there.
Actually, you know, I'm sorry to say we will not be able to accept more questions because they are very hungry people. But there's something like insistingly somebody's asking.
My Syrian brother at least should have the last word, and then we'll go and eat.
And then we'll have short answer, maybe. Short answer question.
Alayna wa alaikum salam, Ramadan Kareem.
Thank you again for this very informative lecture today. It's the insightful way that you especially focused on the distinction between about the different kinds of Islam, and when you focus mainly on ISIS, people are not Islam or they are Muslim. for me, as becoming from Syria, a Christian Catholic from Syria, and part of the International Community Council, Intercultural Network, and the Interfaith here in Cleveland, you added more education to me about that, having known and having read the Holy Quran when I was in Syria, even here.
Thank you.
I have great respect to them. A statement that really reminded me of, again, so it's a question and comment, but I hope I'm very short because I know everybody is hungry here for the iftar. That he who kills one soul kills all humanity.
صح صح.
So how could you elaborate on that a little bit, and this distinction when you explained about the ISIS, they're not the perception of a lot of Americans, even me, but of course I know that, again, to my education here. And what kind of resources can we as mainstream Americans, Christians, Jewish people, Hindu, who have little knowledge and about Islam and the cultural differences, so how can you, lead us to a resource or resources about that to explain more and to understand Islam more and this main distinction of...
I'll start with your second question, and I've been reminded to be the resources. The problem about Islam and Muslims, as I explained, has gone so bad so long that reading books or throwing facts will not be enough. The best resource is breathing, walking books. Scholars, activists, community leaders who embody those values. Because like reading facts is not going to be enough. People have been bombarded with that message enough number of times, as I said many times. It's not going to be enough to just find out those facts. Or even it's not even enough to read the Quran saying killing is the biggest sin. If you kill one innocent person, it's equal to killing all humanity. And if you save one life, it's as if you have saved the whole humanity. That's the soul of Quran. That's the heart of Quran. That's the Quran that I read to my children every night. But the negative views have been so deeply rooted now in the society that you have to get to know Muslims. You have to get into mosques. You have to break bread and have iftars with us. And this is our moral responsibility as American Muslims. We cannot shy away. But communication and education is both ways. Even if 6 million Muslims trying to evangelize the entire 300 million Muslims, trying to get to, it's not going to be enough if the overwhelming majority of non-Muslim brothers and sisters are not doing their part, not opening their hearts and minds, not going beyond the media, not going one extra mile and visiting their Muslim neighbors, and not necessarily doing their part to educate and uneducate, learn and unlearn about Islam and Muslims. Inshallah, the problem, I will end with this one. The problem is not ISIS or Al-Qaeda only. The problem is not extremist fundamentalist Christians only. I think the biggest problem and the biggest potential solution is, unfortunately, overwhelming majority of the Muslims, Christians, and Jews, especially in this country, they are moderate, but they are lazy. They are moderate, but they are inactive. They are assigning all the guilt to these fringe crazies, but they don't realize how their inaction and silence is empowering those crazies. And until and unless we shake the imagination of these silent, lazy majority and turn them into radical peacemakers, radical breach builders, we are not going to see the brighter days that we dream of. But let's do this. This is not an impossible work. Let's turn these lazy, inactive, inefficient, moderate Jews, Christians, Muslims into radical breach builders and peacemakers, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.